I am currently in the process of manual swapping my Volvo V70R, which is the biggest project yet that I've taken on with this car. And I couldn't be more excited about it because I love a 6-speed manual transmission. So in the last episode, we pulled the entire engine and transmission out of the car to get to work on the manual swap, which, as you can tell, is a huge undertaking. Now, why would I pull the engine out of a car when I'm just trying to do a gearbox swap? And there's a lot of different reasons, but the main one being that this engine is just old, it leaks oil, it was neglected throughout its ownership. And while I'm in this deep and I'm doing this much work to the car, I want to fully fix everything wrong with the engine as well in this process. When it finally is a 6-speed, I do want it to be reliable as well. And part of that is just taking care of all of this maintenance today. So today we're going to be fixing everything wrong with my V70R's engine. The first step in today's video is going to be removing this automatic transmission. It's finally time for it to go, and this is going to be the last time it's anywhere near my V70R. After that, we'll be cleaning up this engine entirely. It is very leaky. There was a ton of oil dripping out of this area of the engine, and I've got a whole bunch of exciting parts that are gonna go on. We've got tons of service items, water pump, rear main seal, cam seals, VVT seals, tie rod ends, tensioners. There's our timing belt from Continental. Under here is maybe one of the most exciting performance upgrades, a complete clutch and flywheel kit from X-Clutch. This is going to convert it to a single mass flywheel. As you can tell, a little spoiler, but some BC Racing coilovers as well. I'll tell you more about why I'm swapping that later. But for now, let's start working on the engine. Let's separate the automatic transmission, clean everything up, reseal the entire engine, put it all back together, and hopefully put on that 6-speed gearbox. The gearbox is off the car. This piece right here is what I need to plug back in to the manual car. This is basically what tells the computer in the car which position the transmission is in. So I left this in park, and that means that the automatic transmission computer in the V70R, even when it's manual, will think that the car is in park because this is still in park. And basically what that allows the car to do is just to start. Without this, it won't start because a car wouldn't start if it thought it was in drive or reverse. As far as the other sensors on here, I might unplug them and just plug them back into the harness on the manual car. I should do a little more research on things like this, but I'd imagine the car would be happier with these sensors installed than if they were just missing. So we'll just unscrew these little 10s and plug them back in. But this guy right here is for sure gonna go back into this harness. know this thing could have an oil-fed timing belt. This is crazy. It smells like farts. That's my socket that just rounded. Dude, no. I accidentally rounded off this bolt because my actual socket was round. So let's see if a bolt extractor. There it is, easy. It looks super oily in here. The belt doesn't look cracked. It's a Continental belt, so it's been done at some point. People say that the pulleys fail first, and you can tell that this timing belt tensioner definitely feels pretty loose. I don't know if it should be that easy to move it. There she is. Actually looks not too dirty in here. This fragile little gasket here is the reason that there was so much oil in my spark plug wells. As you can see, it just ripped right in half. These will be getting replaced. And this is actually the main reason that I'm doing this. We've got some crusty buildup in places that I would love to clean out. Then we'll reseal it, put it back together. There's my 5 O-rings. This is why I had to do all this work right here. Similar to my white V70 engine that blew up, when you go further away from the oil pump side of the engine, you can see that it gets a lot gunkier up in here. Oil seems to sit a lot more and maybe circulate less. I'm gonna clean the rest of this up. The bearing journals look pretty good to me. Nothing out of the ordinary going on there. One thing that is pretty important here is not to get too much dirt in the engine. Any gunk here is obviously at risk of going inside the engine oil, and that is not good for the old motor. We are making some excellent progress here on the V70R engine. As you can tell, it's been torn down a lot from where we started at the beginning of this video. The cams are completely removed out of the engine. All of the timing components are removed. The oil pump has been removed. The water pump is gone. This whole ordeal right here is the reason that I didn't replace my spark plug well seals while the engine was in the car, while we were doing the PCV service, and while there was a ton of oil sitting in here, just for the reason that it's this complicated. You have to undo the entire timing. It's a whole big job, and I'm excited to do it now, reseal it, and make sure that this thing never leaks again, at least not for a few more years. You can see I also have the oil pump removed off of the engine, and this is because I want to reseal it as well with a new front main seal, which sits in the actual oil pump assembly, and there's a couple gaskets that go in there. From some conversations that I've had with some Volvo people, it seems like the oil pumps themselves are actually pretty reliable. They don't tend to fail. So I'm gonna put mine back in here with just fresh gaskets so that it never leaks again. It's tempting to want to replace a bunch of things like that while you're in this deep. You know, the alternators off, the power steering pumps off, the oil pumps off. These things could all be replaced, but also I'll take a gamble on a lot of them and put the old stuff back on. If it fails, I have a lot of spares from the crashed S60R and all the other Volvo projects that I've done. So I'm not worried about the immediate failure of those parts. The oil pump sounds like it's reliable from what people are saying on the internet. I've got a little more cleaning to do, and then we're gonna start reassembling, resealing this engine, and putting it back together so that we can bolt up the new clutch kit and the manual transmission. I actually had a spare thermostat assembly sitting in my garage, so I figured while the engine's out, I should throw it on. Now, something that's interesting is you can see where it says Volvo right here. If you bought this part from Volvo, it would be a lot more expensive than this part that I have right here from Borg-Warner. Now, if you look closely where the Volvo logo is on this part, it's etched off on the Borg-Warner one. Now, why would they do that? Why would they scratch something off of a brand new part? Well, it's because this is the exact same thing as this, except without the Volvo branding. So Borg-Warner makes this for Volvo with the stamp already on there, and then they sell it afterwards with the stamp removed. So these are the same part, but you'll pay a ton more money for this than you will for the Borg-Warner one. Now we'll throw on one of these special clamps, slide this over here, then we'll tighten our little hose clamp. Two important products that I'm going to use from my Volkswagen days is assembly lube from Lucas. This is going to go on any cam mating surface, so the bearing journals and these tappets. And then the anaerobic gasket maker is going to go on all of the sealing surfaces. This is in place of a traditional like paper gasket, which I don't believe Volvo even makes for this engine. So you basically put this everywhere, spread it around, and pray to the sealant gods that it doesn't leak oil. So that's what we're gonna do. I gotta go get my new little rubber O-rings and then we'll put this all back together. Just gonna take a little rag with some brake clean, give all this a good wipe down. Dropping any speck of dirt up here is the equivalent of dropping it right in your oil pan. So I definitely wanna clean well and make sure we don't leave a mess behind. Anyway, let's start installing these new spark plug well seals. So just like that, they fit in there beautifully. There's the part number from IPD. And the last one. Now with the assembly lube, I'm gonna start putting some in the right spots. The nice thing about this stuff is that it's really thick and it kind of stays in place. What this red goop is going to do is basically soak up the imperfections in the metal sealing surfaces between the two halves of the cover. It's going to soak up all the little micro imperfections in the surfaces, and hopefully we won't have a leaky engine. Now it's camshaft time. Now we can go back together with this. I wish I could get parts like this powder coated and sandblasted, but at the end of the day, this isn't a show car. And I still think it looks pretty nice, cleaned up. There we go, that's all of them. This red sealant that's coming out the back here is kind of a good example. We can wipe this away now and we won't have any issues with this, but you can imagine this is happening on the inside of the engine too. And the amount that you saw squeezing out here, I would say, is a good amount to where it made it through all of the surfaces on the cover when we pressed it down, but it also wasn't too much that there's going to be a whole bunch of this sealant draining into the engine on the inside. I think this was a perfect amount. I'm not sure what the curing time on this stuff is, but it definitely won't be longer than it's going to take me to put this back in the car, so that's not a worry. These things here that I'm cleaning are the VVT hubs of the engine. You can see that they actually move independently from the camshaft to a certain degree. And what this allows the engine to do using these oil-controlled solenoids that usually sit up here is essentially change the cam angle of the intake and exhaust cam, even though these gears are fixed to the timing belt. So once this sends oil pressure into the hub, it locks the cam one way, and when there is no oil pressure, the cam is free to spin the other way. So it's basically a method of advancing the cams. Kind of fascinating, but there's an issue with them. This one here is pretty tight. There's not a lot of play. This one, on the other hand, has some play in it. Now I've looked up online what the acceptable tolerance of play is in the VVT hubs, and supposedly they don't start having issues until they have about 3 millimeters of movement. I'm gonna push the cam all the way in, and up against it, I'll put this 5 millimeter H&R wheel spacer, and then basically pull the cam out. That is the amount of room. I would say that is not more than 1 millimeter of space there. Again, this is one of those things that, just like the oil pump I could probably replace it now. It's easy to take off the car. I'm actually gonna have to take it off to replace the cam seals that are right behind it. But this part costs about 350 bucks for a new one. And if mine only has a millimeter of play right now, and the maximum acceptable play is 3 millimeters, then I'm gonna leave it on, because if you start just randomly replacing things like this and the oil pump, like that's $700 right there, just between those two parts. I would say it's safe to leave these things on, and if they do fail in the future, then I'll just swap them out. But for the money that we're saving, I'm gonna go with the old parts. I think these are gonna be just fine for a lot longer, but I do need to pull these off because we have to replace the cam seals that live behind them, and so that's what we're gonna do next. Then we're gonna put the oil pump on, timing belt on, clutch on, and transmission on. Putting these seals in correctly does require a special tool, so that's what I'm using here, the official Volvo seal tool. This was about $90 from the dealership, but it gets the job done right. Normally, if the seal in this VVT hub here is leaking, Volvo actually wants you to buy a whole new VVT hub. They do not sell this rubber O-ring, which is kind of insane. So we're gonna take it out ourselves. See how brittle that is? We are gonna replace it with this O-ring from FCP Euro. I believe that this is the only part that FCP Euro themselves actually make, which is kind of cool. They took it in their hands to make a replacement seal for these VVT hubs. That way, if your VVT hubs are leaking, you can just buy this, I don't know what it costs, $2 seal, put it in like this, as opposed to replacing the entire VVT hub like Volvo wants you to do when these start leaking. There it is, good as new. Sort of. We'll pull this one here out. There it is, that's the old one. And then we'll just press in the new one. Big shout out to FCP for that. Saved me 700 bucks right there. Now we can go and bolt these guys back up. Make sure that seal seats nicely. I actually believe that the position of these does not matter for right now, so we're gonna just bolt these guys in like that. Take the exhaust side as well. Beautiful. Put that bolt through here. Now we'll take this guy. There's 90. There it is, 90. After that's done, we can now put back our solenoids that control the VVT hub with a fresh gasket as well. This is not recommended, but I'm gonna do this as an experiment. I'm gonna put just a tiny bit of anaerobic sealant here because I don't trust this old surface. It's a little bit rough. I think there's some imperfections in it, and this is definitely not recommended. This is actually, I've never seen anyone do this, probably for good reason, but I'll be the guinea pig. I'm only gonna put this on the side of the block, since the water pump side will be a brand new, freshly machined surface, but I think this is going to help. Now we can go ahead and put the paper gasket on. There's little locating dowels, and our sealant will help it stick just like that. And then our water pump can go on. These are the bolts I was referring to. You can see that they have sealant on the actual threads to stop water from leaking through, so you definitely want these refreshed. If you don't buy a new set, definitely put some thread sealant on the old bolts. Remember what I was saying earlier as well about the thermostat housing? It was the OEM manufacturer, but just with the logo scraped off. This water pump here is the exact same thing. You can see where it used to say Volvo right there. This is manufactured by Asen though, not BorgWarner. And it's the exact same thing. It's an OEM Volvo water pump, the same ones that Volvo used from the factory, but it just has the logo removed. And because of that, you save a whole bunch of money. Up next is going to be reinstalling our oil pump with the new seal kit. So I'm going to start by pressing out this old seal here. We'll clean this guy up really good. We've got the paper gasket on the back and the rubber O-ring installed as well. So now I can try and seat this in here. And I'm hoping that by having these bolts pre-threaded, we don't lose the position of the gasket. And if we do, it's okay, our engine will just blow up. Ladies and gentlemen, I have made a massive mistake and I may have just ruined this engine completely. I don't really know how this happened, but let me show you what's going on. The camshafts are perfectly locked in place. They are in time with each other. The timing belt's obviously on. Unfortunately, I completely missed the fact that the crankshaft is about 50 or 60 degrees out of time. I have absolutely no idea how this happened. I have the crankshaft locking tool inserted into the block, and I've reviewed the video footage, which clearly shows that when I put that locking tool into the block, the crank was in time. This is the timing mark that's supposed to be lined up right there, and as you can see, it is literally 50 degrees out of time. Unfortunately, this is an interference engine, and what that means is that right now a piston is probably sitting somewhere in this engine touching an exhaust or an intake valve, which means one of the cylinders on this engine might be down on compression. This is not a good situation to be in. I have absolutely no idea how this crankshaft moved, even with that crankshaft locking tool that's inserted into the block. The camshafts are still locked in time back here. So what am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to redo the timing, make sure that the crankshaft is set correctly. Unfortunately, this is just a huge mistake. It's absolutely my fault, even though there was a crankshaft locking tool in the block and it was set correctly initially. I should have kept my eye on it. I think I said from the beginning, the day I started this channel, that I wanted this to be an honest channel about my experience learning to do all this stuff. I'm very much a beginner. It's shown in some of the videos, and now it's definitely showing with this engine that I may have just potentially ruined. With that being said, it's all part of the experience. It's all part of the learning process, and I'm gonna try and fix it. All right, let's pull this apart and see if we can fix it. Take the belt off. Like, how did this rotate? This is, yep, there you go. Now we're back in time. Oh, how is that possible, dude? Now that the crank is back in time, I want to give this another shot. So I'm going to loosen up the cam gears. Remember, these are still locked in place properly, so there is no issue with these. Even though the VVT hubs move, the cams themselves aren't actually moving. Anyway, I'm going to make sure they're all the way to the right. I'm going to put the tensioner mostly back in place over the water pump. Just like that, all the way over. Now I can take the VVT hubs, make sure they move just a little to the right, like that, that's perfect. Now I'll put this on. Crank pulley down here. Now I'm going to remove the cam locking tools. The first test to see if the engine is ruined is to see if it'll still rotate smoothly. And it does, so that's a good sign. So at least the engine spins over really smoothly. I think that's a good sign to start. It took like 3 minutes to redo correctly. For now, let's keep reassembling.
Is that how you get your fucking nice zoom-ins and shit, bro?
That's it right there.
Hey,
damn.
Keep the audio on that too.
Bro, I've been watching.
Our transmission is mounted to the engine, and I couldn't be more excited because it's starting to really feel like a 6-speed. There is now a manual gearbox mounted to my V70R engine, and I can't wait to get this thing in the car. But before we do that, we have to do a leak down test on this thing because I need to find out if I bent any valves or damaged any valves in the process of messing up my timing. Although this test wasn't super conclusive, I think it was enough to say that this engine is healthy. The reason I'm saying that is because I hear more air leaking from this hose than I do any of the other places in the engine, like the PCV side of things or the exhaust or intake. So I'm gonna blame it on this stupid Harbor Freight thing here and say that this engine is fine. I'm pretty stoked because this means that the engine side of things and the transmission side of things is now completely done. Up next, what we have to do is work on the chassis of the car. So we have to install the manual shifter in the center console. We have to add a clutch pedal, shifter cables, a clutch line for the manual transmission to actually actuate the clutch. We have to retune the ECU to a manual tune, which will be pretty cool because from the factory, the manual cars actually make an extra 50 foot-pounds of torque than the automatic cars, which is pretty significant. My upgraded headlights from HID projectors just came in, which I'm pretty excited about. We've got the BC Racing coilovers to put on, and there's a lot more overhauling to do on the chassis side of things. So please subscribe if you're not already. It really helps out the channel, and you can follow along with the build series. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for the support on this channel. It blows my mind every day that people are watching me just wrenching in this garage, but I'm really enjoying it. So I'm looking forward to the next video. I'll see you then. Peace.